Welcome to Duality Check, the podcast where two brothers embark on a thrilling journey through the realms of scientific inquiry, the enigmatic mysteries of the past, and the uncharted territories of spirituality. Join us as we explore the wonders of our world and beyond, all while embracing the roles of curious bystanders rather than experts. Together, we'll unravel the intricate tapestry of existence, blending the dichotomies of knowledge and wonder. Get ready to question, ponder, and delve into the dualities that shape our understanding of reality on Duality Check. I'm Drew.
And I'm Dean.
Welcome back. We are, this is episode 4 now?
Episode 4. Whew. Yeah,
we're cooking.
Today, we're going to be talking about economics and pencils.
Pencils mostly. No, I'm just kidding. Economics mostly. But I'm sure if you know anything about economics, you probably know what we're talking about when we say pencils.
Yeah, and if economics has always been something that is like super, super boring to you, don't tune out yet. We're going to start out with a little short story that will hopefully be pretty interesting. And then we're going to cover like some real basic stuff and talk about what is it in the first place and different schools of thought on it.
Yeah, and we'll probably say some things that might make you question some of your established knowledge or thoughts on the way economics works, maybe.
Right. And if you happen to know more about economics, if you went to school for it or you've read up about it, chances are you may not have heard of the school of thought we're going to be talking about today. So,
yeah, and if you do and we say something that you don't agree with, email us.
Yes.
Let us know your thoughts.
Let's have a discussion.
Yeah, and if you like what we have to say or you don't like what we have to say, it doesn't matter.
Right. We're not here to preach. We're just here to share ideas and have an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. So,
what are we reading?
It is called iPencil. Who's the author?
Author is a guy named Leonard Read. He was born in the late 1800s, like 1890s, died in the 1980s.
Yeah, he lived a long time.
Yeah. He was a founder of an organization called Foundation for Economic Education, FEE.
Fee, fi, fo, fum. Yeah, I'm not an expert on this too, so I'll be reacting alongside most of you. Dean has done a lot of this research and has...
Yeah, I've nerded out on this stuff for a lot of years.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I'll be very good at explaining it or that I know everything, but...
Yeah, and I'm going to try to ask some interesting questions, and hopefully we'll have something good to talk about with this.
Cool. So yeah, this is a short essay. It is written from the point of view of a pencil. It will be Pencil Drew talking to you here.
Pencil Drew here. Here we go. iPencil. I am a lead pencil, the ordinary wooden pencil familiar to all boys and girls and adults who can read and write. Writing is both my vocation and my avocation. That's all I do. You may wonder why I should write a genealogy. Well, to begin with, my story is interesting, and next I am a mystery. More so than a tree or a sunset or even a flash of lightning. But sadly, I am taken for granted by those who use me, as if I were mere incident and without background. This supercilious attitude relegates me to the level of the commonplace. This is a species... Does that say species? Yeah. This is a species of the grievous error in which mankind cannot too long persist without peril. For the wise G.K. Chesterton, God, observed, we are perishing for want of wonder, not for want of wonders.
Yeah.
Perishing, gosh. It does look like pershing. Let me read that one more time. For the wise G.K. Chesterton observed, we are perishing for want of wonder, not for want of wonders. I pencil, simple though I appear to be, merit your wonder and awe, a claim I shall attempt to prove. In fact, if you can understand me, no, that's too much to ask of anyone. If you can become aware of the miraculousness which I symbolize, you can help save the freedom mankind is so unhappily losing. I have a profound lesson to teach, and I can teach this lesson better than can an automobile or an airplane or a mechanical dishwasher, because, well, I am seemingly so simple. Simple, yet not a simple person on the face of this earth, knows how to make me.
Not a single person.
Yeah, not a single person on the face of this earth knows how to make me. This sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Especially when it is realized that there are about 1.5 billion of my kind produced in the USA each year. Pick me up and look me over. What do you see? Not much meets the eye. There's some wood, lacquer, the printed labeling, graphite lead, a bit of metal, and an eraser. Innumerable antecedents.
So before we get into that section, just out in this intro, I love that quote.
Yeah.
We are perishing for a want of wonder, not a want of wonders. Like there's so much around us to be amazed of, and we're not perishing because we have too few things to be amazed of. We're perishing because we're not amazed by them.
Right.
We take stuff for granted.
Right. It's kind of a human characteristic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean that's what we do. We adapt,
Mm-hmm.
and part of adapting to something is just like coming to see it as normal.
Yep.
And
yeah, I mean you see that in every facet of life. You become so used to it that you are just. I mean, even I'll give you the example of being a parent. You know, like you're so used to seeing your kids do cute, funny, amazing things that every time you're around other people that haven't seen your kids in a while or whatever, and they see them do those things. Not that I don't. Yes, I do because it's human nature. But you know, you forget and you see it, and you're like, you know,
right. You're taken aback by like, the seeing things through other people's eyes or realizing how amazing something is that you see all the time.
Yeah, and even another example of obviously with kids is they see the world so differently, and it's so amazing to them. And you have to see it through their eyes.
Right.
Everything is new. Every single thing they do.
Yeah, something about growing up, like we start to gain a picture for how the world works, and at some point we kind of call it good and we stop being as curious.
Right.
So it's a skill to like keep that curiosity, keep that wonder.
Yeah, and it's almost like having the ability to have kids and like go through that, or nephews and nieces or any young ones in your life. Like try looking at the world through their eyes, ask them questions, and talk to them a little bit, and you'll see like a lot of the things that you take for granted are just absolutely just amazing to them, and they'll want to talk about it for hours. So yeah, we'll go on here. Innumerable antecedents. Just as you cannot trace your family tree back very far, so it is impossible for me to name and explain all my antecedents. But I would like to suggest enough of them to impress upon you the richness and complexity of my background. My family tree begins with what is in fact a tree, a cedar of straight grain that grows in Northern California and Oregon. Now contemplate all the saws and trucks and rope and the countless other gear used in harvesting and carting the cedar logs to the railroad siding. Think of all the persons and the numberless skills that went into their fabrication. The mining of ore, the making of steel, and its refinement into saws, axes, motors. The growing of hemp and bringing it through all the stages to heavy and strong rope. The logging camps with their beds and mess halls, the cookery, and the raising of all the foods. Why, untold thousands of persons had a hand in every cup of coffee the loggers drank. The logs are shipped to a mill in San Leandro, California. Can you imagine the individuals who make flat cars and rails and railroad engines, and who construct and install the communication systems incidental thereto? These legions are among my antecedents. Consider the millwork in San Leandro. The cedar logs are cut into small pencil-length slats, less than 1/4 of an inch in thickness. These are kiln-dried and then tinted for the same reason women put rogue on their face.
It's rouge.
Rouge. I was wondering.
That's like a fancy word.
Yeah, for makeup. Yeah.
Or blush, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know why I say rogue.
It's a similar spelling.
Yeah. Rouge on their faces. People prefer that I look pretty, not a pallid white. The slats are waxed and kiln dried again. How many skills went into the making of the tint and the kilns, into supplying the heat, the light and power, the belts and motors, and all the other things a mill requires. Sweepers in the mill among my ancestors. That's a question, sorry. Sweepers in the mill among my ancestors? Yes. And included are the men who poured the concrete for the dam and the Pacific Gas and Electric Company hydro plant, which supplies the mill's power. Don't overlook the ancestors present and distant who have a hand in transporting 60 carloads of slats across the nation. Once in the pencil factory, $4 million in machinery and building, all capital accumulated by thrifty and saving parents of mine. Each slat is given 8 grooves by a complex machine, after which another machine lays lead and every other slat applies glue and places another slat atop. A lead sandwich, so to speak. 7 brothers and I are mechanically carved from this wood-clinched sandwich. My lead itself, it contains no lead at all, is complex. The graphite is mined in Ceylon, Sri Lanka. Consider these miners and those who make their mini tools and the makers of the paper sacks in which the graphite is shipped, and those who make the string that ties the sacks, and those who put them aboard the ships, and those who make the ships. Even the lighthouse keepers along the way assisted in my birth, and the harbor pilots. The graphite is mixed with clay from Mississippi, in which ammonium hydroxide is used in the refining process. Then wetting agents are added, such as sulfonated tallow, animal fats chemically reacted with sulfuric acid. After passing through numerous machines, the mixture finally appears as endless extrusions, as from a sausage grinder, cut to size, dried, and baked for several hours at 1,850 degrees Fahrenheit. To increase their strength and smoothness, the leads are then treated with a hot mixture, which includes Candelalia, something like that, wax from Mexico, paraffin wax, and hydrogenated natural fats. My cedar receives 6 coats of lacquer. Do you know all the ingredients of lacquer? Who would think that the growers of castor beans and the refiners of castor oil are a part of it? They are. Why, even the processes by which the lacquer is made a beautiful yellow involve the skills of more persons than one can enumerate. Observe the labeling. That's a film formed by applying heat to carbon black mixed with resin. How do you make resins? And what, pray, is carbon black? My bit of metal, the ferrule, is brass. Think of all the persons who mine zinc and copper, and those who have the skills to make shiny sheet brass from those products of nature. Those black rings on my ferrule are black nickel. What is black nickel, and how is it applied? The complete story of why the center of my ferrule has no black nickel on it would take pages to explain. Then there's my crowning glory, inelegantly referred to in the trade as the plug, the part man uses to erase the errors he makes with me, an ingredient called factice. It is what does the an ingredient called factice is what does the erasing. It is a rubber-like product made by reacting rapeseed oil from the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia, with sulfur chloride. Rubber, contrary to the common notion, is only for binding purposes. Then, too, there are numerous vulcanizing and accelerating agents. The pumice comes from Italy, and the pigment, which gives the plug its color, is cadmium sulfide.
That is
wow,
a lot. It's crazy. Like,
wow.
Until you read something like this, I remember my first time reading this, I was like, Jesus, like something so simple. Like, just, it involves the entire world. It involves shipping. It involves engineering. It involves just so many trades, disciplines, power. Like, it's not just take some wood, take some rubber, take some metal, wrap it around, stick some lead on the inside. Like, it's...
Right. And obviously, like, there might be some people thinking, sure, you can make a pencil-like object.
Oh, of course.
Like, you could, like, you could just get a stick and burn it a little bit and just rub it.
Right, right. But we're talking making, like, the standard yellow number 2 pencil that we all see in school. Like, it looks simple. We all take it for granted, but it's incredibly complex.
Yeah, I mean, the pencil had to, I mean, and obviously this is, the pencil is the example we're using, but there's so many things that are dependent on other industries and other infrastructure having already been set up, and all these things already being in existence. So,
right.
You want to go on the next one?
Sure. The next section is called No One Knows. Does anyone wish to challenge my earlier assertion that no single person on the face of this earth knows how to make me? Actually, millions of human beings have had a hand in my creation, no one of whom even knows more than very few of the others. Now, you must say that I go too far in relating the picker of a coffee berry in far-off Brazil and food growers elsewhere to my creation. That this is an extreme position. I shall stand by my claim. There isn't a single person in all of these millions, including the president of the pencil company, who contributes more than a tiny, infinitesimal bit of know-how. From the standpoint of know-how, the only difference between the miner of graphite in Ceylon and the logger in Oregon is in the type of know-how. Neither the miner nor the logger can be dispensed with, any more than can the chemist at the factory or the worker in the oil field. Paraffin being a byproduct of petroleum. Here's an astounding fact. Neither the worker in the oil field, nor the chemist, nor the digger of graphite or clay, nor any who mans or makes the ships or trains or trucks, nor the one who runs the machine that does the knurling on my bit of metal, nor the president of the company performs his singular task because he wants me. Each one wants me less, perhaps, than does a child in the first grade. Indeed, there are some among this vast multitude who never saw a pencil, nor would they know how to use one. Their motivation is other than me. Perhaps it is something like this. Each of these millions sees that he can thus exchange his tiny know-how for the goods and services he needs or wants. I may or may not be among these items.
Yeah, right.
So
that makes, that's...
the people who are shipping, driving the ships across the ocean,
they don't want pencils.
They don't want pencils. They don't even realize that their job has anything to do with pencils necessarily. Right. Maybe they realize, like, every once in a while, sure, like, it wouldn't surprise them if there were some pencils in one of the shipping containers, but they don't know that.
Right. Well, if you talk about, like, the people mining and stuff.
The people mining don't realize
don't know
that this, copper and zinc are going to end up in a pencil.
No.
Like, no one,
unless they're getting us direct. Yeah, you maybe the person taking in the order knows.
These,
but not that they care.
Farmers across the world growing castor beans. Like, there's going to be people involved in this who don't even know how to read and write. Not to belittle anyone, but
exactly.
It's because, like, they live their little life. They grow, they farm, they ship their products, and they buy what they need for their families.
Right. Like it says, they are exchanging their tiny know-how for the goods and services he needs and wants.
Right.
They're just doing their thing in their corner of the world, and it just so happens that it's going to create a pencil.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
No mastermind. There is a fact still more astounding. The absence of a mastermind, of anyone dictating or forcibly directing these countless actions which brings me into being. No trace of such a person can be found. Instead, we find the invisible hand at work. This is the mystery to which I earlier referred. It has been said that only God can make a tree. Why do we agree with this? Isn't it because we realize that we ourselves could not make one? Indeed, can we even describe a tree? We cannot, except in superficial terms. We can say, for instance, that a certain molecular configuration manifests itself as a tree. But what mind is there among men that could even record, let alone direct, the constant changes in molecules that transpire in the lifespan of a tree? Such a feat is utterly unthinkable. I, pencil, am a complex combination of miracles. A tree, zinc, copper, graphite, and so on. But to these miracles which manifest themselves in nature, an even more extraordinary miracle has been added, the configuration of creative human energies. Millions of tiny know-hows configuring naturally and spontaneously in response to human necessity and desire, and in the absence of any human masterminding. Since only God can make a tree, I insist that only God can make me. Man can no more direct these millions of know-hows to bring me into being than he can put molecules together to create a tree. The above is what I meant when writing, if you can become aware of the miraculousness which I symbolize, you can help save the freedom of mankind that mankind is so unhappily losing. For if one is aware that these know-hows will naturally, yes, automatically arrange themselves into creative and productive patterns in response to human necessity and demand, that is, in the absence of governmental or any other coercive masterminding, then one will possess an absolutely essential ingredient for freedom, a faith in free people. Freedom is impossible without this faith. Once government has had a monopoly of a creative activity, such, for instance, as the delivery of mails, most individuals will believe that the mails could not be officially delivered by men acting freely. And here's the reason. Each one acknowledges that he himself doesn't know how to do the things incident to mail delivery. He also recognizes that no other individual could do it. These assumptions are correct. No individual possesses enough know-how to perform a nation's mail delivery, any more than any individual possesses enough know-how to make a pencil. Now, in the absence of faith in free people, in the unawareness that millions of tiny know-hows would naturally and miraculously form and cooperate to satisfy this necessity, the individual cannot help but reach the erroneous conclusion that mail can be delivered only by government masterminding.
You know, that's actually very timely with having just gone through Christmas, and I'm sure other people have experienced this too. The USPS is probably the least efficient when it comes to package delivery. When you're going to order something and you see USPS and there's another option, you choose the other option most of the time.
Right. Usually. I mean, unless you're just going for like sheer cost, but like as it gets close to Christmas, it's not about cost. It's about getting
efficiency.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not just to shit on USPS. Like, obviously there's a lot of hardworking people there and like they do work, obviously, but it's to show, and obviously this is not just Christmas either. Like there's been times in the past where they've almost collapsed because they're inundated by what is most likely some kind of government oversight and policy that they are inundated, like they're forced to cooperate with.
Right. And this is just to illustrate the point. It's bigger than like the post office. It's anything that the government does.
Exactly.
You know? Like we find ourselves like so much later in time than Leonard Read wrote this, and now the government does a lot more things that it didn't do before. It does security at airports, and a lot of people could no longer imagine a world in which the government doesn't do security at airports. How could we possibly be safe on planes? Or
imagine if the airlines did their own security.
Yeah, I mean right. Or I mean any other thing that the government does.
Yeah, exactly.
The point is that a lot of these things actually have a history of being done before governments were involved in doing them.
Yeah, it was more of like there was something that happened that caused a big outrage that instead of outsourcing it and allowing free enterprise or man to fix the problem itself, there was a government oversight and they were like, we're going to fix this problem immediately.
Right.
And we're going to institute all these different rules and regulations and we're going to come up with this new department and it's going to be the TSA.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And they tried to do it themselves. And, you know, for all, you know, most Americans, at least, like the TSA can be a bane of your existence if you travel a lot, or it could be a friend if you don't travel a lot and, you know, you want to be safe. Obviously, they do have a pretty good record so far, but
people have tested it. There's like studies where people actually try and sneak things past them, and they are like astoundingly successful at doing it.
Really?
Yeah, it's actually like the more you look into it, it's a little creepy if that type of thing.
Well, I'm not going to look into that. Well, I also don't travel airlines all the time, so
yeah.
I'll go on here. Testimony galore is the next section. If I pencil were the only item that could offer testimony on what man and woman can accomplish when free to try, then those with little faith would have a fair case. However, there is testimony galore. It's all about us, and on every hand, mail delivery is exceedingly simple when compared, for instance, to the making of an automobile, or a calculating machine, or a grain combine, or a milling machine, or to tens of thousands of other things. Delivery? Why, in this area where men have been left free to try, they deliver the human voice around the world in less than 1 second. They deliver an event visually and in motion to any person's home when it is happening. They deliver 150 passengers from Seattle to Baltimore in less than 4 hours. They deliver gas from Texas to one's range or furnace in New York at unbelievably low rates and without subsidy. This is obviously the 1800s.
No, this wasn't written then. It was like...
Yeah. They deliver each 4 pounds of oil. They deliver each 4 pounds of oil from the Persian Gulf to our eastern seaboard, half around the world, for less money than the government charges for delivering a 1 ounce letter across the street. I mean, even back in 1800s, whoa.
He was born in like
right. So
like, I think
early
1900s, like 30s, 40s, or something. So like that.
1930s, 1940s, right.
But the point is taken. Like, it's when you can ship things across the globe for way cheaper than the government can deliver a postcard across the street.
Yeah. What is the difference between delivering a good or service across the world than delivering mail? And why is government taking it on to do our mail when all these companies, private companies, are doing it more efficiently?
Right.
There's
actually one last paragraph. Let's finish this and then we can talk about it.
The lesson I have to teach is this. Leave all creative energies uninhibited. Merely organize society to act in harmony with this lesson. Let society's legal apparatus remove all obstacles the best it can. Permit these creative know-hows freely to flow. Have faith that free men and women will respond to the invisible hand. This faith will be confirmed. I pencil, seemingly simple though I am, offer the miracle of my creation as testimony that this is a practical faith, as practical as the sun, the rain, a cedar tree, and the good earth.
Boom. What a beautiful little 10-page essay, man.
Yeah, no, I've read it a few times, but it's been a month or so since I read it last, and when we first decided to do this episode. It's awesome when you can simplify such a complex thought to this.
Right.
And like really chew on something so simple and then expand it and expand it and expand it and expand it until you realize that everything that you have looking around you, right? Everything around you is free market at work. Is man and women freely able to, like, obviously there are, some instances where that's not true.
Right.
But
the government likes to stick its hands in the way of a lot of stuff. But the point being is that just allowing people to exert their creative know-hows to provide some sort of product, some sort of service, some sort of little bit of something somewhere that can get something done. And that little thing that gets something done is then taken as an input for the next thing. And then it's refined again, and then it's transformed, and then it's shipped across the world, and then it's combined with a bunch of other things. And then some entrepreneur somewhere starts some company, and he's like, I'm going to make I got a microphone in front of me. I'm going to make a new, better microphone, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to start a startup company about how great my microphones are.
Yeah.
And what do? They order all these raw materials that they have no clue how they're produced. They just come in at some later point and try and, improve the mousetrap or improve,
they put it together in
the
a different
process of it
configuration
because they think they can produce those microphones the same way everyone else does, but maybe just a little bit cheaper,
or even just a little bit better quality at the same price.
Right. And so they weren't the ones that invented it. Like, the invention of most things, like, goes back in a chain of events. It's these little know-hows, these little incremental improvements, the complex network of people's creative talents that brings the world we have to us.
And honestly, like, most people can probably attest to this, is just like when you think of like the most creative endeavors and like the most like obvious creative endeavors, like, it's all just people doing what people do. Like, there's no oversight as to how to do that thing.
Right.
Like, obvious oversight other than the person themselves,
Right. And at times in the past where humans have thought they're smarter than the invisible hand of the market, and that they would control it, and that they would dictate it all, and that they would centralize all that production and decide what goes where, those have ended in the greatest human suffering the world has ever known.
Right.
And that's important to keep in mind. Like, not that there aren't certain insights and things to learn from those systems of, obviously I'm talking about like socialism, but like,
sure.
But that you can't engineer the interactions of humanity. Humanity's too big. It's too complex.
There's just too much. There's too much. There's too much to it all, especially nowadays. This might not have been true 20 or 200 years ago.
Right.
But it is true. Even then it was still true, but it was just on a smaller scale. But even you're talking about like the Roman empires, and you're talking about like all these ancient civilizations, right? And they, when the government tried to interject and force the different states to do what they wanted, things fell apart.
Right.
Yeah. So we're up on our first break here. We'll go check on the kids. Looks like Wyatt's meditating. Sawyer's a starfish, but we're good here. We'll see you in a bit.
Adios.
And don't you say
episodes are. I like the beat though. I love it.
Yeah.
So we're back.
Welcome back to Duality Check.
We're going to get all serious now because we're back. So, just because we've done it every podcast so far, and we're going to keep doing it because why not? Our beer update. We are drinking Las Coast Hazy IPA. It's very straightforward. There's no fancy name. I mean, it's Las Coast, the brewery.
Yeah.
And
up
then
in
Hazy
Eureka,
IPA.
California. I've actually been up to there before.
Yeah.
It's
I went to
awesome.
the one in Eureka because Rachel, my wife, went to school up there. And it's actually good. Oh, 6.7%. Sorry, Dad.
Yeah, it doesn't meet your 7%.
Sorry. Is it 7? Is that what he said recently?
I don't know. I think that's about the range where he starts.
He was, obviously, we're recording this just after Christmas. Merry Christmas, everybody, and Happy New Year. We're
recording this between Christmas and New Year, so Christmas just passed for us. This will be out in mid-January or something like that for you guys.
Yeah, so he got a sneak peek of our other episodes that y'all probably have heard now. Hopefully. And go check him out if you haven't.
He was so excited that we talked about his beer tastes.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm gonna come in.
He's like, I'm gonna show up. I'm gonna show up with beers, and I'm gonna bring the beers, and we're gonna talk about the beer. I'm gonna take over a mic. I was like, yes, that sounds great.
I'll just shout from the background.
Yeah,
we only have 2 mics set up right now.
We'll hear you. We'll turn off the noise gate.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's fun.
He's a funny guy. You guys would enjoy it.
You guys would very much enjoy him. And I know the people who know us know what we're talking about.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, Las Coast Hazy IPA, 6.7% alcohol.
It's tasty. I like this one a lot.
It is good. It's very clean tasting.
I was trying to read this label, but it's printed white on yellow. It's super hard to read.
Oh, my God. It's terrible to read.
So we're going to skip that. But look them up.
The only words I saw were notably orange, which I do taste.
Yeah.
All right. We'll get back into this here.
Cool. So
what were we talking about?
We had just finished the essay. We were talking about just kind of the nature of the free market and the invisible hand. And
yeah, we didn't actually talk about that much yet, but the invisible hand is like the idea of like the free market without government interference, right?
Right. So I believe it's not necessarily about the lack of government interference.
Right. It's not government necessarily. It's about
the fact that there is no central planner in economies, right?
Yeah,
like it's about, I believe it was coined by Adam Smith when he wrote The Wealth of Nations, which is like kind of like a foundational economics work. I forget even the era. I think it was in the 1700s, maybe even earlier.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, this is like foundational economics.
Economics, yeah. He was from like the classical school, and so he heavily influenced like the founding fathers of America and a lot of thought at that time. Anyway, I believe the invisible hand comes from him.
Okay.
But it's an interesting concept. Like, it's just the idea that, things come together and you don't even
as needed.
Realize. Yeah.
As needed.
Yeah. So I did all these notes on the pencil itself that I don't know I want to really go into. It's essentially repeating the essay itself, but I did some research and I'll share some of these links that I thought were pretty interesting. Like I got some like videos of like actual pencil factories and how the pencil's made.
It is a good
some videos on like how
dive to go down.
Milling wood is done.
Yep.
How different pigments work. Like this stuff is
how
incredibly complicated.
Is mined and like, there's one how it's made of aluminum foil, like all these different things.
Yeah, that one's super interesting. It shows them like
how erasers are made,
how they keep stretching it and stretching it and stretching it. It's
until it breaks. Yeah, like till it's like super thin.
Until
it's
super thin. Yeah.
Like like a lot of people know that gold is very, I don't know what the word for that is,
malleable.
But malleable. Like you can take a small amount and spread it over a giant thing or whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not giant, relative. Anyway.
Yeah. I looked into like foil stamping, and man, it's crazy. The process of mining aluminum is super interesting.
Well, that, I mean, what your notes there are kind of pointed towards, like, they're not super repetitive, if you want to read that or talk about it or whatever.
Yeah, I just kind of have other places I'd like to go with this, but like, for instance, on like this aluminum, so it comes from processing a substance called bauxite, which is mined all over the world, but the biggest suppliers are in Australia and China.
Ooh, that's a good gamer tag.
The closest bauxite mine here in America is in Arkansas. That's a big one. And processing it into aluminum involves these chemical processes, because aluminum isn't like super pure in the ground. You don't find like giant lumps of it. It's like distributed as like a component
within metals,
within like
other
whatever sedimentary rock, the bauxite, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like they have to subject it to all of these chemical processes to like erode,
even refine it
and sift and sort until you end up with aluminum. It's super interesting, but I will link a bunch of these videos and this research I did. So if you want to like dig into some of this stuff, I encourage it because it's really interesting. But in general, this whole thing is about the process of the free market and about economic thought in general. And that is really the point that I'd like to talk about, because economics is super, to me, very interesting.
Just real quick, while you're pulling that up, in Earth's crust, aluminum is the most abundant metallic element, 8.2% by mass, and the third most abundant of all elements after oxygen and silicon. Doesn't make it easy to get to, but
right.
Just thought I'd point that out.
So economics is an interesting thing. Like if you had to define economics, how would you try and define it?
I would say it's the practice of,
or the economy, I suppose.
Yeah, I was going to say it'd be more of like, it's like the practice of maintaining a balance of goods and services and needs.
Yeah, I would maybe say like,
I don't know. That's a pretty basic way to say it, but
it's like the process of humans like producing and transforming objects to fulfill their need and exchanging.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So there's different schools of thought in economics.
Yeah.
So the most influential in America right now, that actually has like the ear of most politicians, that is behind a lot of the decisions, that is behind a lot of the financial policies and whatnot, is a school of thought called Keynesianism, which is
Keynesianism. That's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, which is
because I was saying Keynesianism.
Yeah, it's Keynes. It's John Maynard Keynes is the
that makes sense. Okay,
is the guy who is like kind of the founder of that tradition.
That's with a K. That's what threw me off.
Yeah. So previous to Keynesian, I don't think Keynesian invented this stuff, but back in time, economics was done by like thinking. Like just thinking through how things work and trying to like tie together the logic of stuff. And then someone came along and decided that, like the sciences are getting started and empiricism is getting going. So empiricism is the process of inductive thought, which is to gather data about the world and then sift and sort that data and hypothesize about it, and then design experiments and gather more data and sift and sort and design experiments to constantly learn about the natural world and refine our knowledge about it. That's
science.
It's called empiricism.
Right, science.
Well, more generally speaking, science could be defined as the process of just learning, of gathering and systematizing knowledge about the world.
So is this more pointed in a certain direction?
So there's two schools. Like there's two sides of the coin. There's the empiricist side, and then there's the deductive side. So empiricism is inductive, and logic-based stuff is deductive. So mathematics, geometry, law, and originally economics are examples of deductive or logic-based sciences.
So these are sciences based off of inductive thought?
Based off of deductive, right? So like...
Well, yeah,
like
but they're
geometry.
based off of your
so
other...
If you go into a geometry class, right, and you're learning Pythagorean theorem...
but it's based off of other math.
Right, but it's based off of logic.
Sure.
It's built up by logic. So we understand the Pythagorean theorem about the proportions of a triangle by building up logical rules.
Yep.
And we can prove that they are true without going out in the world and finding natural pyramids and taking a tape measure and measuring the angles and taking a protractor.
Right.
You
can do it without that. Right.
So regardless of whether you go out in the world and you find a triangle and you go and you measure the sides and you measure the angles and then you come back and you're like, this doesn't match the Pythagorean theorem. My empirical evidence shows that the Pythagorean theorem is false. And the reason that doesn't work is because logic...
Well, you can... The way that it's built is...
The rules of logic prove that the Pythagorean theorem is true. That's where, like in geometry, you get into like proofs. If you can do a proper proof, it legitimately proves there's no ifs, ands about it. There's no amount of going out in the world and collecting data that can overturn that truth. That truth is rock solid.
Well, and it also it's because instead of the human going out there and doing the measurements, it's done with just the numbers. It's
done with just the reflecting in your head.
Yeah, I mean,
and maybe using a pen and paper to like help you think.
Right, you need visually. Visually, you need some kind of stimulus to help with the thought.
You know, some people do, some people don't.
Well, of course, but still, even if you aren't visualizing it, there's still a visualization to be done there because you're talking about distances and you're talking about, formulas that help distinguish the different distances and how they correlate with other things. So, yeah, so it's basically just the way of looking at the visual, the three-dimensional world, but without needing to going out and measure it yourself.
So we're talking about empirical knowledge, which by definition, empirical knowledge, because it relies on gathering data and hypothesizing about it to refine a theory and then going out and testing that theory with further experiments and more data.
In the natural world, right.
The natural sciences have made tons of progress and we have this whole modern world because of it, but it's actually always open to revision. No empirical knowledge is 100% proven because the nature of empiricism means that tomorrow you could go and take measurements and they're different.
Right.
And anyway, so all knowledge in empirical thought is provisional. It's subject to refinement. It's subject to further study.
To change, basically, yeah.
Whereas in deductive logic, which is called like a priori, have you heard that term before? A priori?
I have heard that, yeah.
Yeah, so a priori knowledge is knowledge that you can arrive at without going out to the world to measure anything, without going out to the world to gather any evidence. It's knowledge that you can gather just upon reflection and clear and careful thinking.
And in practice, like it's basically like plugging them in a sense, like when we're talking about like geometry and like triangles, like if you're talking about that basic of a thought, right? It's basically plugging in the numbers of the distances of each side of a triangle and knowing that there's going to be an angle that you can define.
Right. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared.
Exactly.
Is not open to debate.
Right.
Because it has been formally proven.
Exactly. And the angles that it creates and all of the different dimensions that it creates. So no matter what the actual numbers are, it's going to be this and this and this and this. And you can change the numbers on an infinite scale until you get to you know a circle. But like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's you can just change the numbers and do it without having to go out and measure, oh, this triangle is this and this triangle is this. And you can, you know, this is the angle that it created because of that. Like I measured it, I know, you know. You don't need that in this because you can just plug the numbers and you can visualize the thing that you're trying to measure and all that.
Right. And in fact, there's no perfect example of a triangle or of a circle in the real world, right? There's no triangle or no circle that will be 100% true, but we know the concept of one is governed by these logical principles, and there's no debate about it.
So if you ever saw one, it'd be like,
right. So what actually, if you go out and measure a circle or measure a triangle and you come back and you say the Pythagorean theorem is wrong, all you're actually proving is that that wasn't a perfect triangle.
Right. But perfect doesn't mean it wasn't a triangle. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Anyway, so.
But when you see one,
these two modes of knowledge, empiricism and a priori knowledge. Okay. Now let's go back to economics. So economics has split into one school that stayed on the a priori side of reasoning about economics, and then these modern schools of economics that have gone the empirical route. Okay. And that's the big difference. So what I'm going to talk about today is the school of thought that stayed on the a priori side.
That's Austrian economics.
That is Austrian economics.
And Keynesian is the empirical.
Keynesian. There's also the Chicago school. If you ever heard of Milton Friedman, he's like the founder of the Chicago school. He's actually okay. So
recently read about him.
The Chicago school is interesting because they're actually have, in many respects, but not perfectly, they're very free market oriented, like the Austrian economists. But the biggest difference between Chicago and Keynesian and Austrian is that the Chicagoans and the Keynesians, they believe that the best way to go about learning and doing the science of economics is to go out in the real world and write down numbers of prices and write down historical events of trades and gather all these statistics, and then to take those statistics and try and suss out mathematical theorems that govern the economy as a whole. So they're going about economics in an empirical way. They're trying to reduce the entire economy to an equation.
I see.
So that they can then use that equation to predict if you tweak this or that lever in the future, that you can get this or that outcome.
So they want to be able to predict is what like kind of basic, like they wanted to be able to predict. So they came up with a way to be able to predict.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Which turns out to be incredibly useful for like governments and kings and people who try to run societies.
Because you can predict.
Because to them, their population is just a bunch of statistics.
It's not
these
people.
These are faceless people. This is their flock.
No
they don't see them as a
companies.
bunch of individuals. They see it as aggregate numbers
that give them something.
Right. And so they have a desire to push the economy in this way or that. So they're going to try and pull on these
strings, you would call them.
Right. They're levers in order to tweak the economy to move this way or that.
Whatever strings might be available to them.
So the Austrians are totally different, right? It was started by this guy named Karl Menger back in the 1800s. And then his student was a guy named Ludwig von Mises.
That's the name I know.
Yeah. So Mises was the first guy who completely systematized Austrian economics.
Okay. So the other guy was more like theoretical.
Well, he laid all the groundwork for that style of knowledge. I mean, not all the groundwork. Like we're talking.
Where was he from? Just so I know.
This is why it's called the Austrian school, because they come out of Austria.
God, obviously, yeah, that makes sense. I should have known that. But so, what time frame was that?
So Karl Menger is a little bit older. Mises, he's around in like the 20s and 30s and 40s.
So it must have been the 1800s, and that the other guy was around.
All of his theories. He's also Jewish, living in Austria, right leading up to World War II, where Hitler's going to take over. So he actually escapes out of Europe.
That's an interesting fact.
And goes to America and starts teaching in America, where he gets new students, Murray Rothbard, and he kind of sparks the Austrian movement in America.
Gotcha. Okay. Wow, I didn't know that. That's an interesting fact.
Right.
And that's an interesting time frame for that.
And Hitler and the Nazis were not interested in a free market. They were interested in a command and control economy.
Obviously, yeah. I mean, look at, we won't get into that.
So he wasn't very popular there. So I actually, I'm taking an excerpt here that I want to read to you guys from a book called Man, Economy, and State by Murray Rothbard, who was a student of Mises. And it's his sort of synthesis of Austrian economics with libertarianism and like systematically going through Austrian economics. I would read from Mises, but I actually have been going over his books in preparation for the show, but his stuff is really dense and it can be a lot harder to follow. The way like Rothbard words a lot of this stuff is like a lot easier to follow. So
much more.
I want to go over the real basics, like the foundation of what it is, what Austrian economics is built on.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. So the distinctive and crucial feature in the study of man is the concept of action. Human action is defined simply as purposeful behavior. It is therefore sharply distinguishable from those observed movements from the point of view of man, which from the point of view of man are not purposeful. These actions include all the observed movements of inorganic matter and those types of human behavior that are purely reflex, that are simply involuntary responses to certain stimuli. Human action, on the other hand, can be meaningfully interpreted by other men, for it is governed by a certain purpose that the actor has in view. The purpose of a man's act is his end. The desire to achieve this end is the man's motive for instituting the action. All human beings act by virtue of their existence and their nature as human beings. We could not conceive of human beings who do not act purposefully, who do not have ends in view that they desire and attempt to attain. Things that did not act, that did not behave purposely, would no longer be classified as human. In this fundamental truth, it is this fundamental truth, this axiom of human action, that forms the key to our study. The entire realm of praxeology and its best developed subdivision, economics, is based on analysis of the necessary logical implication of this concept. The fact that men act by virtue of their being human is indisputable and incontrovertible. To assume the contrary would be an absurdity. The contrary, the absence of motivated behavior, would apply only to plants and inorganic matter.
Whoa.
That's an excerpt from Man, Economy, and State. So that's called the action axiom. And to try to argue against it is to be self-contradicting, because you have to act in order to argue against the action axiom.
Whoa. Yeah. No, that's a... Woo. That is... I mean, what can I say about it?
So that's what I mean by a priori knowledge, by logic-based knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. So by sitting there and thinking of the fact of the matter that humans act, you can draw an entire theory of what he calls praxeology. This is what Mises termed termed it. Praxeology is just the study of human action. Okay. And Mises, as an economist, his biggest interest is in the division of human action that is trading and production, which he deems as economics.
Okay.
Right. But there's other types of human action,
obviously, yeah,
that aren't about productive behavior, going to, church or whatever. But,
I mean, productive is a loose term in that sense because productive to whom? If it's productive to you, then...
Right. There are other ways that you can study human action, though.
Right.
Like sociological ways or historical ways or... Psychological ways.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And I don't know if anyone's actually picked up like the praxeological style in those fields.
I was going to say, yeah, that would be interesting to see.
Yeah. So that's the foundation of Austrian economics. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we can actually pull a bunch of insights and understandings from the fact that man acts.
Right. If you're human.
So as long as it is true that man acts, then you can use formal logic to unpack that statement and pull out other truths that are attached to the fact that man acts. Okay.
Let's do it.
So action is made up of employing scarce means guided by knowledge to achieve an end so that we can alter the course of events in a way that we wish to bring about. So we're trying to change the flow of time. We're trying to right some sort of discomfort.
Yeah. And something that ails us, we want to fix.
So you're sitting on the couch and you start getting these hunger pangs.
You want Doritos and
you really want to keep like playing video games, and that's an action you're undertaking. But this hunger is starting to come up, right? And so you look into the future and you see this hunger is getting worse and worse, and so you decide to act. And to attain that act, you will use the knowledge in your head that if I go to the fridge and I put together some ingredients and take those ingredients and put them in my mouth and chew them and swallow them, I won't feel that hunger anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're using scarce means. Means is just like a fancy word for saying like whatever objects, whatever physical matter you need in order to attain that end. The end being to satisfy your hunger.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can have a praxeological analysis of the fact that you get off the couch and make a sandwich. So that's the first unpacking. Okay. So we now have new categories. We've got ends, we've got means, we've got knowledge.
Yeah.
We've got time because it takes time to do an action.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as an action that doesn't take time to perform.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can build the idea that costs exist logically, because the fact that I'm going to go to the fridge and make a sandwich means that at that same moment, I cannot continue sitting on my couch and playing video games. Mm-hmm. So I am foregoing the cost of the enjoyment of video games because in my mind at that moment, I now value higher the fulfillment of my hunger.
Yeah.
And so by choosing one action over another, you're now incurring costs. You can't do everything at the same time.
Right.
You have lots of things that you can do, but you're always going to, at any given moment, you can only be doing one.
Yeah.
So we now have the concept of cost.
Yep.
We have the concept of profit because
personal costs. Personal costs.
Well, everything is personal. Everything.
Oh, sure.
Everything in Austrian economics, instead of going from a society down to the individual, it all builds up from human action up to society.
Yeah, that makes sense. As far as like cost goes, yeah.
Right. So that's cost. There's profit because by going and making that sandwich, I now have either attained my goal and my hunger is fulfilled. So I have profited because I'm now in a better situation than I was before I did the action. Or I'm a terrible cook. I burned everything. My oven caught on fire and I'm even more hungry than before.
And it's still a cold sandwich.
Right. And now so that's loss. Right? All of these concepts built on the fundamental idea that humans act.
Right. Yeah.
And in order to argue against those things, you have to argue against the fact that humans act. Because if humans act, these things are true. Because they logically come out of it.
Yeah. Because obviously, like, imagine the first human, right? They had no fucking clue what was going on. They were like, what do I do? Am I hungry? Mm-hmm. What do I do? I thought I just became not hungry. What is happening?
Right.
I get to make choices.
We can build the idea of value, of valuation, because at any given moment, like I said, you're sitting there, there's like a million things you could be doing at any given moment. And when you sit and you're like, what do I want to do? Like, you're going to sit and think in your head about the things you could do. And whatever rises to the top as the most urgent or the most important to you, you've now ranked that among the other things you could be doing as the highest ranked thing. So we know that at that given moment, you value making the sandwich more than playing the video game, because if you didn't, you would still be playing the video game.
Right. Yeah. You're describing every Saturday night for me.
You've proved your valuation by the fact that you did it.
Mm.
And we can know that valuations are subjective. There's no such thing as an objective value of anything, because the amount that you value something right now is not the same that I value that same thing right now. How could you compare?
Yeah, of course.
You're going to have a valuation. I'm going to have a valuation. But in order to compare two things, we would have to have some sort of standardized unit. So what are we going to do? Like, make units called like happiness units or
hunger
whatever.
Units.
I mean, like, even outside of hunger, this applies to everything.
Happiness, joy.
Right. I mean, so like you could say, I
things.
apply this many units of happiness to making the sandwich right now. And I could say, well, you say 10. And I'm like, well, I apply 70 units of happiness to having a sandwich right now. And then how do we know that the units we're talking about are the same? How can we, like, there's no way to untangle all of the things
you need language
involved in order to know that your units are the same as my units, and therefore value is subjective.
Man, those first humans were fucked.
So then let's take a bunch of objects. Like, you have a bunch of objects in your house or whatever, and you value any object that you have
subjectively. Yeah.
You value it based on its ability to achieve ends for you in the future.
Mm-hmm. Personally, though.
Right.
Yeah. Whatever ends you deem valuable.
Right. So then we can start getting even more creative, and we can start building the logic out further, and we can come up with this idea in economics called marginal utility.
Okay.
So let's take an example, okay? So I want you to follow this thought experiment here. I'll guide you through it.
I'm with you.
So let's say that you have 20 plastic containers, gallons of water. And we can even number them. Gallon number 1 all the way up to gallon number 20.
That makes it easy.
Okay. And let's say you got all these different uses for water. Okay. How would you maybe value those things? What are the uses for water that you can think of in order of most valuable to you that you couldn't live without to least valuable?
Drinking.
Might be number 1.
Cooking. Mm-hmm. Probably number 2. Even though you might not necessarily know to cook with water right away. But bathing. Cleaning, general cleaning, making sure my cave is clean, making sure the walls, all the art that I did on my cave wall is clean. Mm-hmm. And then I would just say recreation.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So we've got.
How did I score?
It's all subjective.
Okay.
So we've got those valuations for you. You said drinking, cooking, bathing. What did you say next?
I think I said cleaning.
cleaning,
and then
then
recreational.
recreation. Okay.
Yeah.
So now let's say of those water jugs, I take away number 3, 4, and 5.
Oh shit.
Now, does that mean that because you took away 3, 4, and 5, that you're going to have to give away your second, third, and fourth preference for use of water?
No.
What would you do? What would you go without if all of a sudden you found yourself with less water?
Recreation.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've got this rank of things in your head of uses for water, the most important, and you remove some water and you're going to get rid of the thing that you value the least.
Yep.
As far as the uses. So that's called marginal utility.
Easy to understand.
Yeah. So
Well,
that allows us to do something where we can understand that by adding another gallon of water, so they say you have no water now,
right.
and you had to buy water, and you had to buy that first gallon. You might pay whatever you pay a decent amount for because you're thirsty and you need to drink.
I gotta live.
Right.
Yep.
And then I try and sell you a second gallon, and you might pay pretty good money for that because you got to cook.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I try and sell you a third and a fourth and a fifth gallon.
Less
and as we
less
add
less.
more and more and more of the thing, you're willing to pay
less and less and less
for it because
based on the things that I need. Yeah.
Right. Based on the ends that you seek to achieve with that water. Yeah. Those are ranked lower and lower in your head. So the more and more and more of a unit that you buy, you're going to value it less and less and less.
Right. I mean, I can live without water gun fights.
Right. Right.
You know.
So
I'll pay a little bit less for the water gun fights.
That's the law of marginal utility, is that the more of a unit you buy, for every extra unit, you're going to value it less and less. And that goes for everything. That goes for money. That goes for bricks. That goes for water. That goes for food, anything.
Yep.
That's
absolutely.
We've just created an economic law based off of logic.
Yep.
So that's praxeology.
Okay. And that obviously goes into more than water.
Yeah. And wherever I lack in like explaining this, like read the sources. But you can't actually refute these things without refuting that humans act, because it all falls out logically.
And if you don't act, you're probably not reading this or listening to this podcast. So
right, because that's an action.
You ain't a human. See you later, AI. Get out of here.
So you can actually use that law of utility that that we just uncovered to create an economic concept called the downward sloping demand curve, meaning that the more and more of a thing that you sell in quantity, like the less and less of a price you can get for it.
Demands, yeah.
And that's like a graphical mathematical concept,
but I'm visualizing
it's
it right
actually
now.
Pulling it out of logic. So it's not to say that like praxeology can't use math or doesn't use math. It's just, it's not using math to predict humans. It's using logic to build up economic principles.
Right. And then the math can follow.
Right.
In a sense, because it knows, and it's based geographically, it's based on need, it's based on the demographic, it's based on all these different things. Yeah.
But in any given instance, if you go and measure an economy and the specific downward sloping demand curves, like any given example you can find doesn't refute the law of marginal utility. It just says that in that instance, there's more going on.
Sure.
Just in the same way you go out and you find a triangle in nature that doesn't conform to a Pythagorean theorem, it doesn't mean that the Pythagorean theorem is wrong.
Make sense. Yeah.
It means that that's not necessarily a perfect triangle.
We're still looking for that perfect triangle.
So, yeah. You can also build up wealth creation. So transforming an object, if you take an object out of the state of nature and you transform it, then so it's ready to be consumed in production, then someone else can take that thing and use it to sell or to cook or to clean with. Like you have taken something and changed its value, and that's where production comes from. Right? Like you go out in the woods, you cut down a tree, you mill it, and then you take planks of wood to the market and you sell it. Like you didn't, you've now created value and you've started the process of production.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's pretty easy to follow.
Yeah. There's another cool truth that you can uncover in Austrian economics, which is that all voluntary exchange is by definition increasing wealth. So if you and I,
no matter the value
of the things, because the person who wants the thing from you
values it.
Yeah. So if you and I are going to trade, right? Like I got a beer.
Right. I want that beer.
I'm hungry, so I want a sandwich from you.
I can make a sandwich.
Right.
I make a good sandwich.
Even if like objectively you're at the market, you can buy a sandwich or a beer for this or that. Like if you have a sandwich and I have a beer and I give you a beer and you give me a half a sandwich.
Immediately.
Right.
The value is.
What you can know in that exact moment is that in that moment, I value the sandwich more than the beer. And in that moment, you value the beer more than the sandwich. Yeah. And so when we exchange, we have now both become
We agreed to the fact that these are both the things we want more than the thing we have.
Right.
To offer.
Right.
Yeah.
So regardless of what prices on store shelves say, what our preferences have shown is that we have done a mutual value exchange and that we have both profited.
Right. Even though, you know, tomato prices might have skyrocketed the week before.
Right. So all voluntary exchange by definition creates wealth, because what is wealth except for a growing of your satisfactions, an achieving of your ends praxeologically.
Okay. Makes sense.
Let me see where we are.
Yeah, I was going to say, we should check on time.
We are over.
Of course we are. Yeah. Infamously.
Yeah. So anyway, let's take a little break.
Take a break.
And then we're going to go over some more.
I'm going to go eat a sandwich.
I'm going to have a beer and maybe we'll trade. Depends how good a sandwich is.
I think I want beer more than a sandwich. All right, see y'all in a bit.
All right, adios. We really need to record. We just had a whole talk about sandwiches.
Man, it was the greatest talk too, and it was at the very last sentence of the talk. We were both like, we should have been recording.
Yeah. I know that's what you guys really come here for, is knowledge about making the best sandwiches.
Yeah.
Drew's claim is that if you're going to put a sauce on one side of the bread and a sauce on the other side of bread, the mustard belongs with the cheese and the mayo belongs with the meat.
Yep. Whatever meat. Doesn't matter. Yeah. Or if you prefer a different sauce other than mayo, it still belongs with the meat other than the cheese.
Like if you're doing like a creamy sort of sauce.
Yeah. Any kind of creamy sauce, it goes with the meat. I'll stand by it.
Yeah.
I'll debate you. Please email me. I will debate you about this topic.
Host at dualitycheck.net. Send us an email.
I'll
because then watching. I brought up hot dogs and I was like, but what about? I don't see a lot of people putting just mayo on their hot dogs, but I see a lot of people putting just mustard.
And then I was like, Is a hot dog a sandwich? I don't know. I don't know, but honestly, I don't eat hot dogs all that often, and I do put mustard on my hot dogs. Mm-hmm. But I think I'm going to start putting mayo now that you said that and see if it tastes better.
You should try it.
But I don't think it's a sandwich still. Don't get me wrong. I'll report back.
Report back.
And please debate me. I love debating this topic. My other brother, John, and he'll probably talk about this with me too. But he always used to make him sandwiches. Partially because he's my older brother and I was younger, and he was like, dude, you make the best sandwiches. And it like gave him some kind of power over me. But I was like, I watched him make a sandwich and I was like, dude, you are just doing it all wrong. You are lost in this world, my young brethren.
He valued the ends of learning to make a sandwich too low, and Drew set him right. Absolutely.
I'll continue to do so with anybody else. Email me. I'm telling you.
That's great.
Where were we?
We talked a little bit about like wealth creation. Before that, we were talking about the law of marginal utility. So Austrians have interesting, and I actually haven't studied this on like other schools, but Austrians have an interesting like theory of the formation of money.
The formation of like the exchange of a thing that wasn't the actual thing.
Yeah, they have like a sort of theoretical framework for how a money comes into existence.
Okay.
Which I find super fascinating. And it sort of sheds some light on our current society and what we call money now.
Let's hear it.
So the Austrian school basically believes that money comes about through a natural process of exchange, right? So starting with barter. Okay. So let's go into a barter mindset. Okay. We've got person A, B, and C, or let's give them names so it's easier to follow. Drew, Dean, and John. Okay.
Perfect names to do. Let's do it.
So we'll put you as person A in my diagram here, which I'll post.
Okay.
So
we'll rename it to mayo mustard.
So you are a person who has like specialized in like tending chickens and producing eggs. Okay. And you want something else, like you want butter.
Sure.
Right. And I've specialized in making butter. Okay. So a simple barter is like, hey, Dean, I got all these eggs. I don't got any butter. And I'm like, yo, Drew, I got all this butter and I don't have any eggs. And because of the law of marginal utility that we talked about earlier, all of this excess of a product, you value it less and less and less. Right. So because you have all these eggs, a bunch of those eggs, I mean, there's a certain amount of eggs you're going to keep for yourself to eat. Right.
Absolutely.
But then past a certain point, like, why do I need all these eggs?
It's a waste.
And same for me with butter. So we're going to approach each other and see that I'll see all those eggs you got and I'll be like, yo, I would love some eggs. Good. And you're going to see all this butter and be like, yo, I would love some butter. So we're going to exchange barter. And that essentially proves out through the law of marginal utility that we're both profiting again. Because you're going to value that little bit of butter that you get from me higher than this
excess,
this 100th egg that you have in your stock.
Probably 300. I'm probably doing pretty good.
So, and vice versa for me. But barter has limitations, okay? Because not everything takes the same amount of effort to create. So while you got all these chickens and you got hundreds of eggs, like as you just said,
300s of eggs,
and maybe I have a little less butter because butter's like an involved process. I don't have a bird to poop it out for me. I have to like go through a process to make it. I might have a little less butter.
Yeah, maybe we should be exchanging how to make eggs and butter.
So then John comes along and John produces shoes. Okay.
What a fool.
So shoes is a more involved process. He has to actually like get all these raw materials and process them and
put them all together.
Yeah. So it's like a
lot more labor intensive.
Labor intensive.
Yeah.
Like, the amount of like work and effort and time he has to put in to create shoes, like for him, like he's just going to have less shoes, but that doesn't mean that you and I value them less.
Right. I mean, how else am I going to go out and check on my chickens?
Right. So you've got eggs and John's got shoes, but what if you approach John with your eggs and you're like, yo, John, let me get some shoes. I got eggs. And John's like, hey, I've already got eggs. I don't need eggs.
Oof, man.
Now what do you do?
Who the hell's this other seller?
Right. So, and you talk to him and like, all right, well, if you don't need eggs, what do you need?
Right.
And he's like, well, I could really use some butter. So then you come back to me. You're like, hey, Dean, let me go ahead and trade you some eggs for some butter. So we're like, all right, cool. Boom. We trade. And now you take that butter and you go back to John and be like, yo, John, here's that butter you wanted. Let me get some shoes.
Boom.
Okay. Now, what is that butter that you just bought to you? You didn't buy it because you wanted butter. You bought butter with your eggs because you wanted shoes.
That's income.
So the butter is what's called a medium of exchange.
Yep.
Okay. Like you didn't buy it for the consumption. You
I didn't
bought
buy
it
for the purpose of that. Yeah.
for the purpose of trading for something else you wanted. So it's just a means to an end for you.
Right.
In that scenario. So that's called a medium of exchange.
Man, what a great trade I'm making here. What a great trade. I got chickens pooping eggs for me. I got people making butter for me. I got shoes coming in for the butter that chickens are pooping for me. Right. I mean, wow.
And back to iPencils, like it would have been so much harder for you to like have that know-how of all of those things, right? But it's a lot easier for you to like focus on your chickens.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And same for the two of us, me and John.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, so barters can become more and more difficult to make, right? Like as soon as you approach someone and they don't want what you have, they want something else, then you have to go to someone else, find that thing, exchange, and then go back and exchange.
Or find a new person, right?
Right. So now let's take it a step further where we're going to introduce Beth. That's our sister. So Beth is now... she makes plows. Okay. Now that's even way more involved than shoes, even like crazy involved. Like that thing, like it might take her like months and months and months and months and months to create a plow, but still based on the law of marginal utility, maybe she wants to keep one plow for her own crops that she grows for herself. But like, she doesn't really need 10 plows, but that making plows is what she knows how to do.
I mean, so you got 10 kids, you got 10 plows, you got 10 rows being plowed at the same time. I mean, shoot.
Right, but her profession isn't farming. She just farms for her own food. Her profession is making plows.
Right.
So the law of margin utility means every extra plow she makes is valued less and less and less to her directly, right? So she wants to go on the market and she wants to sell these plows. You would really like a plow to tend your fields for chickens because plows are used for that. In this logic.
Hey, they gotta eat something.
Oh yeah, maybe
they eat corn.
Maybe you're growing your own feed
grains,
for them.
Some kind of grains. Yeah.
Okay, so now your goal is to buy a plow. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, got to feed them chickens that do all the work for me.
But Beth comes to you and is like, not only do I not want eggs, I want butter, but the amount of butter I want for a plow is a freaking ton. I want lots of butter.
Yeah.
So in order for you to procure a plow, you now have to go to multiple people and be like, yo, can I give you eggs for butter? Yo, can I give you eggs for butter? Yo, can I give you eggs for butter? And you're doing all these transactions to accumulate all this butter just so you can go back to Beth and be like, I want a plow.
Yeah.
Right? So now you see how like super complicated this barter system gets. And in order to simplify it, all of these people are starting to recognize that butter is a thing that everyone wants for some reason. And so everyone's starting to
buy up all their
trade stock. Butter as an intermediary, as a medium of exchange to get other goods. And as more and more people realize that, hey, Beth accepts butter for plows, John accepts butter for shoes, Dean accepts butter for eggs, or Drew accepts butter for eggs. Like more and more people are realizing, well, everyone is willing to use butter as a medium of exchange. So they might take any chance they can get to just procure some butter so that they can have it for convenience to then give to someone else for something they really want. And now all of a sudden butter is being elevated as a common medium of exchange that all of us are using.
Right. Butter's a good one. Yeah.
And essentially through that process and through getting it more and more complicated with more and more people, you discover a thing rises as a medium of exchange.
As the commonality between all of the different things.
Right. And when enough people in a society all use the same thing as a medium of exchange, that's when now we have a money.
Do you think it was butter originally?
Well, actually, it's really interesting because like so many things have been used in mediums of exchange as monies.
Grains, I know.
So there, I got a little snippet here from
Let's do that.
From Man, Economy, and State again. So people, so when we're talking about medium of exchange, the people in each community tended to choose the most marketable commodity available. Right. Tobacco in colonial Virginia, sugar in the West Indies, salt in Abyssinia, cattle in ancient Greece, nails in Scotland, copper in ancient Egypt, and many others, including beads, tea, cowrie shells, fish hooks. Through the centuries, gold and silver specie has gradually evolved as the commodities most widely used across the world as a medium of exchange.
Yeah, because you evolve the sense of like needing the specific commodity itself, right? To be the thing that you need in order to exchange
for the stuff you really want.
Because you're growing the thing, you're receiving the thing, but you don't need those things to be the thing that you're exchanging constantly.
You don't necessarily need the gold for the gold's sake. You don't need the cowrie shells for the cowrie shell's sake. You don't need the fish hooks for the fish hook's sake.
Unless you're ancient Egypt and they put everything in gold or...
Right. So among other factors, the high marketability has been... so for gold and silver, among other factors in their high marketability have been their great demand as ornaments, their scarcity in relation to other commodities, their ready divisibility, and the great durability. In the last few hundred years, their marketability qualities have led to their general adoption as media throughout the world.
Right, which makes sense because you want something that's easily divisible. You want something that's not necessarily the thing that you need, but it's something that you can attribute to the thing you need, right? As far as like the quantity or the quality.
Right. So back to Beth selling her plows, right? So if she gets gold, so if she gets butter, the problem with getting all that butter is by the time she goes through and uses it all to buy the stuff she wants, it might go rancid.
Exactly.
It might, someone might,
you don't want
an animal might come in and eat some of it.
Right. You don't want
there's all sorts of things. It's like butter is actually not a good medium of exchange. It's not a good money because there's all sorts of things that can cause it to degrade. Right. Not only that, but people can quote unquote counterfeit it because someone may be like, yo, everyone in this community, they'll accept butter for everything. And so they go off, they make a freaking buttload of butter, and then they come into your community and they buy up everything with all this butter.
Interject it, yeah.
Right. And so that can lead to weird, that's actually called inflation.
Yeah.
And anyway, so what you want is your medium of exchange to be scarce and not reproducible. And gold and silver are very hard to mine. There's so much more of it in the earth than we've ever mined out, but I think, what was the figure I heard? Like in all of Earth, like the amount of gold can fit into like a couple swimming pools, like Olympic-sized swimming pools.
It's a very small amount in comparison to the amount of exchange that it's been a part of. Right.
And so it's super durable because gold is one of the most stable
malleable,
elements.
like we were talking about earlier.
Malleable. You can make it into coins. It's also like you can confirm that it is in fact gold relatively easy.
Yeah. Especially nowadays, obviously. But even back in, ancient Egyptian times, like they used it a lot of times to just coat a lot of things and they saw the value and the
it's
ability
called
to
gilding.
project their wealth as a society by coding all of their things in it. So they valued it and they wanted to gather it,
Right.
you know?
And that's part of the theory, is that like a commodity typically has some sort of like root usefulness that leads to it becoming a medium of exchange. And for gold, that is the fact that
It's divisible,
it
malleable.
is like used as a decoration.
Yeah.
It's used as jewelry. It's used in statues and used in all these
You can cover
uses.
You can
and today
cover
it's used in
so many
electronics and all
Yep.
this other stuff, right?
Right.
So there's a bunch of things that make one thing outcompete another thing as the best medium of exchange recognized throughout the world, and over
Right.
time
Over
that has risen to become gold and silver.
Which makes sense, yeah. Naturally. Unless something else comes into the play.
Right. So the origin of money is super interesting.
But we're far beyond gold and silver now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We're very far beyond that.
So yeah, and there has been historically ways that people have cheated the system with gold and silver, right? So back in the day there used to be
Andrite or whatever it's called.
well, there used to be like shaving, like if people stamp them into coins and you can just shave the tiniest minute amounts
You're saving
off of
money.
like, if you're a person who money passes through and every time money passes through, you
shave a
shave
bit.
it.
That's tax.
You shave it. And then you take all those shavings and mint new gold coins out of it. Like, you've essentially stolen value of that money and you're watering down the money supply.
tax.
That's actually where the ridges on coins come from, is as a mechanism of detecting shaving.
That's a fun fact.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's a fun fact. Not that anything is coated in gold now, but I mean, there are obviously
it's
still gold coins, but
right. Gold is still super
it's
valuable.
not the main
commodity.
median of exchange anymore. So
Right.
there's less worry about shavings.
It was by, that would get into the whole like banking conversation, which will be its own episode, but essentially banking comes along because gold for large quantities becomes heavy, cumbersome, and risky to travel with. These people create these systems called banks where you can park your gold there and they'll give you a receipt for
how
gold.
much you have. Yeah.
And then you can safely travel with that receipt. And when you get to where you're going, you can pay someone that receipt where they can then go exchange it and deliver and receive
and
the
then
gold.
you get your gold. Yeah.
Right. And so that's the beginning of paper money.
Which is crazy because they
It's
still have
just
to
a
deliver that
receipt.
gold.
Right. The
Which is still
origin of
risky.
paper money was as just a receipt for gold deposits
But that's also just for the individual.
for the individual. Right.
But the bank still had to deliver that gold.
Right. But that was the service they offered, was
Right.
to keep it secure and to transport it secure.
Right. And if you think about the old West
So that
times,
you didn't
right?
have to take that. You didn't
Right.
have to take
that
risk
burden
yourself.
on, yeah. Because like if you think about Old West, when you're talking about bank
The
robbers and
Wells
stagecoach
Fargo
robbers,
stagecoach that's traveling across.
But they had the shotgun rider that had the shotgun, and then you had like other riders in the back with guns, like protecting the stagecoach. But the person who actually the gold belonged to was nowhere near.
Right.
So they were safe because of this whole system of receipts.
Right.
Which at the time were what?
They're using that
greenbacks?
iPencil market phenomenon of little know-hows, where the bank's little know-how is the security and storage and transportation
Right.
of the valuable resource itself.
And the person just, obviously valued that.
Right. But then later on,
But the banks took a cut still
Yeah.
at the time, right?
I don't want to go too deep into banking, but
Okay,
I just find it so interesting.
But I really was super interested in the Wild West factor of it. But it's all fascinating. Like that whole time period of
Right.
like when we got off of the gold standard and we got off of that whole thing was like a
Right.
crazy time period. And
It's just like
in American history,
those gold
specifically.
receipts became so common that eventually people just started trading the receipts back and forth rather than ever going and getting the gold out because it was so convenient.
Right.
And so the gold would stay in the bank while the receipts would pass around. And that's the actual origins of paper money.
Well, isn't that?
But every little piece of receipt represented physical gold in the bank at that time.
But wasn't there an issue between banks too? Like that was why there was this whole centralized banking system.
That comes later on down the line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like eventually they saw there was a problem. The fact that people are just trading receipts and the gold was never where it needed to be when they called for it, right?
Yeah. So what actually happened is that at some point, the banks started cheating the system. They realized that of that gold they had in their vault, only a certain percentage of it would ever get demanded out at any given time.
Right.
And so
they can just hang
they're
on
like,
to
well, why don't we make use of this gold that is just collecting dust in our vault? And they go and they start loaning it out to people.
That was where a lot of that began.
That's where
the loans and
right. So like you put your money in there and then the bank's going to turn around and loan it to people, charge interest for that loan, make a profit on the interest. And then when the gold comes back, the gold will come back in general before you come and demand that gold. And because not all of the gold is there in their vault anymore, that's when they start becoming prone to runs on the bank.
Right.
That's the beginning of what's called fractional reserve banking.
Right. Okay, we can go back, but
yeah. But that brings up the next point I wanted to talk about is just like, once a money comes into effect and once everyone is using a money, then you can get the formation of prices. Okay. So because everyone's using the same money, whether it be gold or cowrie shells or fish hooks, everyone in your area is using that same thing as their money. And so now you can start to understand that like a certain number of fish hooks is worth a loaf of bread, a certain number of fish hooks is worth a t-shirt, a certain number of fish hooks is worth a plow, right? And that's the formation of prices.
Okay.
And prices allow people to take their economic pursuits to a new level.
Right.
With the information of prices, you can then start to write down the prices and create businesses where you process a certain number of things with the expectation later on of being able to gather this or that price for the thing. That's when you realize like, hey, Beth's plows sell for 10,000 fish hooks, right? But I think I can create a plow creating process. And with the people I know and the prices I can get for the things and the process I created, I think I could sell plows for 8,000 fish hooks. So
competition.
So you can now create a business around that. And you can do calculations based on your inputs and your outputs to figure out if you've made a profit. And that's where like the economy starts taking on a whole new level. Once you have a money, once you establish pricing, now you can start doing calculations. You can do profit and loss statements, and you can start doing math to figure out more complicated economic transactions. And then the economy starts to complexify just because prices exist.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. I find all of that super interesting. But yeah, and then interest rates, right? So what, if you had to define like what is an interest rate, like in as simple as you could.
As far as loans go, right? Like it's
just
interest
rate.
Yeah,
what is an interest rate?
I would just say it's the appreciation of the value for what you got.
All right. So I would the Austrians would say is like what an interest rate is it's the price of money. And specifically, what it really is it's actually a measurement of time and how much someone wants money now versus how much they want money later. Okay, so let's say your plow business is super successful and you've got all this money stacked up and you don't need it all right now. but someone else has like something that they could do money with, and they're like, yo, you got all this money, would you give me some? And you're like, sure, I don't need it now, but I need it later. And because it could just sit here, or I could loan it out and then charge interest to get it back later. So I have what's called a low time preference for my money.
Right. Over time. Yeah. It's basically the appreciation of the money over time.
Right. And the person who's asking for the loan has a high time preference for money because they need the money now in order to do something with it.
Right.
Right.
To do the deal that they need now, they have to do it now. So they are willing to. Yeah.
Right. So what interest is it's a measurement of how much people want their money now versus they want that in the future. And the balance of that, if more and more people in society who give loans to people want their money now, the interest rates will go up. Mm-hmm. Because they'll have to make a lot more money to be willing to loan it out.
Right.
But if their time preference goes down, then the interest rates will go down. And it's also influenced on the demand side too. If more and more people want loans and they're willing to compete for those loans, they can drive the interest rate up.
So simply, it's the lenders, whether the lenders have the capability of loaning the money for longer or shorter. Right.
And in theory, what it represents collectively as a society is it represents how much. So when you have the understanding that money represents trades of valuable things between people, like every amount of money represents like a transaction, like a thing you could buy. Right. Yeah. So all of the economy has a certain amount of things. There's a certain amount of eggs. There's a certain amount of shirts. There's a certain amount of plows and fish hooks and whatever, right? There's a certain amount of stuff in the society, and all the money in the society should be able to buy those things at a certain ratio of money to those things existing. Sure. That's where the prices come from, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But if people aren't actually using that money right now, then that means they're not going to go out and buy those things right now.
Right.
So it's society demonstrating a preference that they don't need to consume things now. They'd rather consume them later. So that essentially frees up
a bunch of capital,
a bunch of actual physical resources in the economy for other people to use
to get things now. Yeah.
And then later on, they can pay that money back.
Right. And also the people who are getting the money back can use that money later for whatever investments or whatever they need to do at that time. Yeah.
So I like to do this thing to explain like what inflation is, where like you've ever played Monopoly, right? Have you ever played it like the proper way, quote unquote, where you like bid for properties?
No, probably not, because I just am not.
Yeah, no one has the patience to play the real Monopoly. Yeah. It actually goes a lot faster if you play it the way it's supposed to be.
No, I'd be willing to, but I think you need everybody to be down.
Yeah. I think
because all it takes is one person to just throw the game.
Right. So most people, when they play it, they play by the quote unquote house rule where like you land on Boardwalk, you can't afford it. So you skip on buying it.
Right.
But in the real rules, when you can't buy it, it goes up for auction to everyone else in the game.
Ooh.
Yeah. So at that moment that you land on it, you either have to buy it or it goes for auction.
And they can just bid on it.
People start the bid.
Yeah.
And then the bids go around up until whoever is the highest bidder, no one's willing to bid anymore. And then that person gets Boardwalk. That's the real way Monopoly's supposed to be played.
Right.
Okay. So this bidding process, right? So we got 4 people sitting around with a certain amount of Monopoly money, right? Someone just landed on Boardwalk.
What are we at right now?
We're ready for a break or even getting close to the end.
Okay.
Let me finish.
Go ahead, finish
Are the kids waking up?
Well, yeah, one of them is.
Oh, shoot. All right, let's do one more break.
Okay, we'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll start this Monopoly talk over again.
Yeah, because there's one more concept I want to get through, and then we can end the show off after that.
Let's take a quick break. Enjoy some music. See you in a bit.
And we're back.
Hello.
Boys took a while.
Yeah, a little bit of time on that one. My, the toddler, is in his own toddler bed now. So he's experiencing some sleep difficulties with that.
Yeah.
It's like,
Drew just showed me how when he's scared, he pulls all of his blankets and stuffed animals right around him in a circle.
yeah, he puts himself in the corner of his bed and like protects himself with all of his stuffies. He's totally fine. Like, look, yeah, he just laid down.
Oh, there he goes.
And I was like, look, you got all your animals with you. He goes, oh yeah. And then he like immediately calmed down.
Oh,
It's funny.
gosh, freaking cute.
He is hilarious. All right, so
we left
were
off talking
about
about Monopoly, right?
Monopoly.
So
That was our analogy, right?
yeah, do you remember? I gave you the analogy that someone lands on Boardwalk,
Right.
they can't afford it,
Mm-hmm.
so it goes up for auction.
Yeah, which I've never played that way, but I like the idea of that.
Well, it means that all the properties get bought up the first time someone lands on them.
Right, so there's
So
no
you don't
going
have to, like,
around and around and around and
Like
around. till-
monopolies happen quicker, therefore people start getting taxed for them quicker, and therefore people
Right.
get out quicker, and the game goes quicker.
Yeah, well, I don't know why more people don't play that way.
Yeah, it's actually faster, and it's pretty fun.
And it might be more frustrating in a sense, but
Sure, but it gives you auction practice.
yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
what was the analogy? And,
Okay,
like,
so
let's connect
here's the
that.
reason I say that. Okay, so here's like put yourself in that situation. Okay,
Yeah.
you have a certain amount of money in your hand. Okay, and so does everyone else. This is the most desired property on the market. So everyone starts bidding. Okay, and whatever. Let's say it ends up bidding all the way up to 500 Monopoly dollars. Okay. Just because someone can afford that and that's how much it takes to outbid everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's play the same scenario. It goes up for auction. But then all of a sudden someone walks by and just drops an extra $1,000 in everyone's hand.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, and then the auction starts.
Mm-hmm.
What is the price of Boardwalk going to be? You can't tell me exactly, but is it going to be higher or lower than 500 Monopoly dollars?
Likely higher.
It's going to be higher because everyone has more money to bid with. It's the most desirable thing. Everyone's bidding for it.
Mm-hmm.
There's more money available to bid with.
Right.
So the price goes up.
Yep.
Now, if it drops on everyone at the same time, then it's sort of a wash because everyone got money at the same
So
rate.
yeah, it's basically going to end up being the same.
Right. And so in a similar way, this is a metaphor for inflation.
Right.
Okay. And this is where the Austrian school starts to get different. Than
Starts to
the Chicago.
differentiate itself.
Right. Because everything we've been talking about before is really interesting. And those are the building blocks for the economy. But this is where really like the policy recommendations start changing.
Right.
Okay. Because the Austrian definition of inflation is an increase in the money supply.
Is it an unnatural, like, I guess it would have to be an unnatural increase in the money supply, right?
No, just in general. So like if money is gold and all of a sudden some miner strikes on a big vein of gold.
Right. So it could be natural.
It could be natural inflation from someone finding a bunch of gold, or it could be a government and paper money just printing a bunch of money and
So
dropping it in the economy.
it's just the growing of the money supply. Got it.
Right. That is the Austrian definition of inflation. In Keynesianism, I don't know their exact definition, but essentially the definition of inflation is when the prices of goods go up.
What's that?
It's like an event that happens that causes prices to rise.
Right.
It doesn't actually mention the quantity of money.
I was going to say, it doesn't actually talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So because in Keynesianism, their ideal managed economy is like printing a certain amount of money to adjust for the natural growth and productivity that happens in human society. So to them, there's an ideal amount of inflation.
Yeah.
But to an Austrian, any money injected in the system purely
inflation,
that's defined as inflation.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so we come along to the monopoly scenario, drop $1,000 in everyone's hands, and that's an even inflation across the board. That money got injected everywhere at the same time. So it's relatively fair, even though it may disrupt what prices things are, right?
Right.
But in actual fact, in our everyday society with governments and central banks and monetary policy, inflation doesn't happen that way. Inflation happens where money gets created through the Federal Reserve banking system and new money enters the economy. But that money doesn't go to everyone at the same time.
I was going to say most recently, especially in U.S., the COVID relief package,
which the amount that the Americans got versus, or the American people got versus the amount that these big politically connected companies got is totally different.
Right.
All right. So let's play the monopoly scenario again. The banker comes by right when Boardwalk goes for auction, and he only drops $1,000 in the hands of one person. Still inflation.
Sure.
But what's the outcome going to be? Who's going to win that auction?
Yeah, likely that person who can now outbid everybody.
Right. And that is what happens in our economy. When money enters through a certain point, whoever gets that money first,
the certain package,
the rest of the economy isn't really aware that new money exists.
Or reacting to it, yeah.
Whereas the person who gets that fresh new money, all of a sudden they have this supply to go grab resources out of the economy, but the rest of the economy doesn't know that money exists yet. And so they get things at the original price, whereas every single time they buy and sell, it has a pressure on prices. It causes prices to change. And so eventually that money will make its way throughout the economy and prices will rise everywhere, and eventually wages will rise, and eventually it'll even out. So in the long run, it will find an equilibrium, but the process of injecting money at one point causes wherever that money gets injected to have an unfair advantage price-wise compared to everyone else.
And the ripples aren't felt until later.
Right. And so someone starts getting all these resources for free. It's like playing Monopoly and that auction goes on sale and someone only drops the money on one person's table.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so there's an understanding of inflation. Now, that leads to what's called the business cycle theory, and this is like the gem of Austrian economics. This is like the most important thing to pull away from it. So business cycles, do you know what a business cycle is?
Break it down for me.
Okay, so like a business cycle is the idea in the economy that we have these times where all of a sudden the economy is like screaming, like people are making money left and right, like people, like things are selling, like things are going up.
People are spending their money and businesses are reaping the benefits of it.
And then the inverse of that is like a depression or a recession.
Okay, yeah.
And where things all of a sudden take a crash. The famous one in 29 with the Great Depression. And then you got like the other big ones that have happened in our lifetime, and the 99 .com bubble and burst. Then you got the 2008, and then you got the COVID
crisis,
right? So Keynesianism tries to explain crashes of the economy in a certain way, where for them it is a misallocation of the balance of the economy, where the government can come in and manage by injecting money here and there to try and cause a recovery to happen.
Right. So they're just
something unnatural happened to cause a crash in Keynesianism.
Right. And they're trying to inject money to fix it, scramble and fix it in a sense.
Or that kid? You keep looking.
He woke up, yeah.
Oh, is he crying? Oh. We could pause.
Alrighty.
We're back.
We paused. We took a pause.
So, yeah, I was saying that the Keynesian view of an economic crash is that there's something out of balance causing a crash, right?
Right. It's unnatural in a sense, right? That's what their thought is.
Or someone's being greedy. People aren't acting properly.
But it's
there are in the Keynesianism, the economy needs managing, or else it will crash. Basically, inevitably.
Right, but don't the Austrians also, like, they know of inevitably markets crash?
Okay, so let's go with the Austrian approach because it's different.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Austrian approach is that the unnatural thing that's happening is before the crash.
Right.
So the unnatural thing that's happening from the Austrian point of view is that money is being injected into the economy, that a central bank is tweaking interest rates. That when you inject a bunch of money into the economy, you're going to get a bunch of superfluous purchases. You're going to get people making investment decisions that they wouldn't otherwise make because that money wasn't there before.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Remember, the first people who get that money, the people you drop that money on in the Monopoly game, they're going to come ahead. Right. So if you do the same thing in the real economy, you drop a bunch of money in, or you turn down unnaturally through the process of central banking, you tweak down the interest rate. Remember when we talked about what is an interest rate? An interest rate is the economy's preference for whether it wants to save money and free up resources for future investment, or whether it needs that money now and those resources now. Right. So low interest rates are a signal to the economy that it's a good time for investors to start long-term projects because people are choosing to save. Right. So with low interest rates, you can make profits on long-term projects that require financing.
Right.
When the interest rates are high, a lot of those long-term projects that require financing aren't as viable. And it's supposed to be that way, according to the Austrians, because the economy is telling you, hey, we need resources now. We prefer our money now. We need these things. So then the government comes in, they turn down the interest rate. And what does that do? It sends the signal out to the economy, hey, investors, now's a good time to invest in projects. But that's not what the economy was saying naturally. And so all of these projects start happening and the resources aren't there to back it up. So it's actually the boom before the crash that's the unnatural thing. It's an injection of money in the economy. It's causing this superficial bubble to build. But that superficial bubble is people investing in projects that the resources aren't there for. And inevitably, it's like a game of musical chairs. At some point, the resources aren't going to be there for certain projects, and projects are going to start failing. And when projects start failing, investments start going bad. And when investments start going bad, people start panicking. And when people start panicking,
so you see runs on the bank. And
so in the Austrian point of view, the recession that happens is actually the economy saying, hold up, guys, we've gone too far with this. What we need to do is reallocate these resources. We need to put a pause on things. We need to allow some of these bad investments to fail. So that those businesses that were investing poorly can be liquidated. Their assets can be moved around to people who will manage them better. And the economy can start rebuilding.
Whether that be the businesses going under or new businesses taking over that capital in a sense and then like running with it.
And so the analogy that you'll hear a lot of Austrians use is it's like a hangover. So like, you know, drinking a bunch of alcohol for the night, maybe it feels good when you're doing it. You're getting this big high, you're getting this big buzz, you know, things are happening, you're having a good time. But what's coming down the line is that inevitable hangover, that inevitable crap feeling the next day. And that's what a recession is. The recession is the hangover. The cause of the hangover is not the fact that you just happen to wake up and feel bad. The cause of the hangover is the fact that you drank all night last night. And so that's the analogy.
Interesting. Okay.
And so that's where Austrian and Keynesianism really split. And that has huge implications on the country, has huge implications on how the world should be managed.
Yeah.
Should we have a bunch of central planners and central banks and people sitting there with their economic math equations trying to calculate what's the right amount of money to inject in the economy at the right time?
Yeah, that's an important point too, is it's not just like a singular point of the government that's making all these decisions. It's all these different groups and like all these different policymakers and all these different things that are happening all at the same time that are like trying to like, oh, we need to do this now because it'll help this and that, like there's all these, like, it's not really just a single mastermind. It's more of like an entity with a bunch of masterminds.
Yeah, it's a bunch of like interests that are motivated to manage things in a certain way,
to pull the market in a certain way and that, whether it be lobbyists trying to like manipulate the market to like benefit their sector of business or whatever.
Businesses trying to take advantage of the new cheap money policies and try and get in on really cheap loans so they can invest in these startup ideas that have no grounds in profitability. They're making these wild bets, but they can do it because the interest rates are so cheap and they're building all these companies, spending all these resources on things that are ultimately doomed to fail.
Yeah. And also because they
just like the .com bubble.
Yeah, because they inevitably they know that like it doesn't really matter. It's all printed money,
right?
Because it's on this model,
right? So in the .com bubble, you get all of these hype around the brand new internet. You get all these investment firms pumping all this cheap money into oh, you got a startup idea? Here's money. Oh, you got a startup idea? Here's money. And all of these projects aren't necessarily sound, but they are easier to invest in when the interest rates are artificially low and when money is being pumped into the economy through inflation. And that will ultimately crash. And so that recession is supposed to happen. Or in the 2008, all of these people getting advice that real estate only ever goes up. Real estate only ever goes up. Real estate only ever goes up. And so they buy these investment properties and everyone's trying to flip houses and the market gets chunked up artificially. Everyone thinks they can't lose money, but ultimately it's going to pop.
Yeah, it's sad. A lot of people who are just buying their first time homes are the ones that are like they try to get a really good rate at some, but it's artificial. It's not realistic to where the market is going to inevitably go to.
Yeah, I mean, in the long scheme of things, like land is limited and population grows, so there should over time be an upward pressure on real estate prices. But like when everyone's trying to flip houses and like that,
it's unnatural the way the market was saturated at the time.
And so the Austrians will tell you that we can't tell you when you start printing a bunch of money, when you start artificially lowering the interest rates, we can't tell you where that bubble will necessarily form.
But it's going to.
But it's going to form somewhere.
Yeah.
And when it forms, it's going to cause all this misallocation. Stuff will start failing, and that will ultimately lead to a recession or a collapse.
Yeah. The pop.
Yeah. So there's a lot of other like implications, and I'm not going to back these ones up, but I'm just going to state a couple so we can wrap up the show for today. But some other things that Austrian theory brings about is the idea that by definition, or through Austrian praxeology and the chain of logic, they will show that minimum wage laws necessarily, when you raise a minimum wage, the inevitable outcome, all things being equal, is that you're going to increase unemployment for people who are young and people who are less trained. So the less skilled workers, the ones who are at that rate, you're going to have a higher rate of unemployment for them. They can show that prohibitions necessarily increase violent black markets, alcohol prohibition, drug prohibition, even child labor in some countries. Like when you start flat out banning child labor, like for some families, like they're not sending their child to a factory because they're greedy. They're sending a child to work somewhere because they need all of the work they can get to put food on the table. And when you take away that option, you start getting really dark things like child prostitution markets and stuff. It's terrible. But like in countries,
the black markets of those child laborers. Like
right.
you're still going to labor out your child. It's just not going to be legal.
Right. And that's the consequence of
obviously we've kind of pushed back that. We've gone past that.
In America, we've grown to a level of wealth that's not really necessary for most people anymore.
But it's still happening. Yeah.
Right. Subsidies are always going to distort.
Yep.
So anytime the money or the government comes in and pumps a bunch of money into one thing or another, it's going to cause unnatural distortions. Yep. All of these things, back to the iPencil, they are messing with that invisible hand that is guiding the market, that natural ebb and flow of human relations working back and forth that lead to an equilibrium. So when you come in and you make some big adjustment, there's going to be a consequence.
Dude, and especially with governments too, like a lot of this money is taxed. Like it's tax dollars that you, the taxpayer, who are also a worker, who are also a spender in the economy, are now paying or are putting money towards the company who you are inevitably going to be buying from. Mm-hmm. Like it's just such a distorted way of,
And, for people who do study economics and, like they haven't necessarily spent a lot of time on the Austrian stuff, you'll hear arguments that, Austrianism isn't scientific, but that's going back to that a priori versus empirical. Yeah. And I think, honestly,
it's arguing against the fact that we are acting.
Right. The root of the problem why the Austrian school isn't taken more seriously is because the people in power, the people in control, what they want is someone to come along and give them options for how they can manage people like statistics, right? They don't want the Austrians to come in and say, anything you do is going to have a consequence. Anything you do is going to upset the natural balance of the economy. They don't want that.
They want an out.
Advice, because you can't really, like, the logical conclusion of Austrianism is that the free market is the way towards the most prosperity.
Well, and also in a sense, the free market is the way to free the people in a sense, because instead of looking at people as a commodity or a statistic, you're looking at people as the engine of the economy and not just a statistic of it.
In Keynesianism, they see deflation as an issue that they need to correct for. So for them, printing a certain amount of money to prevent deflation, have the just right amount of inflation to keep prices the same is the most important thing.
Whereas, who's going to stop them from continuing that?
In Austrianism, the theory is no, deflation is a good thing. And
it's a marker.
Right. Deflation means that if you have the same static set of currency or gold, silver, if it's gold or silver based, you can't just inflate it because gold and silver take effort to gather, right?
Yeah, they're limited.
Right. So if you have a solid non-fiat currency, then by definition, as the economy grows, as the economy becomes more productive, prices will go down over time rather than going up over time. And that's actually a good thing. Yeah. And the reason that's a good thing is because you, as the average everyday worker, you can work your career, you can take money, you can save it in the bank, you can save it under your mattress.
Yep.
And guess what? Over time, the value of that money is going to go up because of the deflation. And so just saving money and working hard is actually a retirement plan.
Right. Instead of having to put it into an artificial thing to
under a Keynesian economy, under constant inflation pressure. Yeah. If you just save your money, if you work your whole life and all you do is save your money, you don't invest it, you're a sucker because every single year you're losing value of your money. And so it forces people into the stock market where they're not educated, where they don't have the education on how to make money. And so what do? They sign their money over to experts who, quote unquote, have their best interest in mind. And they put that money in stocks and mutual funds. Right. And all of a sudden, everyone is putting their money into Wall Street where there's a bunch of politically connected people.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing is just a scheme by the powerful and connected to essentially farm value and wealth out of the population
out of the population to continue their power and greed.
Right. And so they try and do it at a rate where, it's not going to, what's the saying? You don't want to, the straw that broke the camel's back. They don't want to, they don't want to crush they don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So they're trying to manage it at such a rate that they can continually extract value without killing the goose that lays those golden eggs. And anyway, I'm going to leave tons and tons of links in the description of books from advanced to simple. And if you're interested in reading more, if you've studied economics, at least, give Austrian thinking a shot, read a couple of the books, see what those people,
see how you feel,
how their arguments hold up to you. If you're new to it, I'll recommend some of the easier reads and resources and podcasts and videos. So it's an important topic. It controls the way our lives are run. And when everything is working ideally and free, it can be a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Or it can turn us into a system of extracting value where everyone's running that rat race, just trying to get ahead.
Got to grind just to stay at the same level you've always been.
Yes, exactly. So hope that was fun or informative. Hope I didn't lose everyone just talking about economics. I hope everyone got something from it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of episodes, right?
Yeah.
You can always find the episodes that you like most and keep on going. But this has been a fun episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Google. You can find us on YouTube or Rumble.
Yep.
You can find us our socials. Follow our social media. We got Facebook, Twitter,
TikTok,
I guess X.
Kind of TikTok, X,
Instagram.
All the things.
Check out dualitycheck.net. Get involved in the conversation. Send us an email. Let us know what you think on these topics. We'd like to read some on the show and have a conversation
about your philosophy on sandwiches.
Yeah, is a hot dog a sandwich? Hosts at dualitycheck.net.
All right, yo.
Take care.
Later.